we've been really excited. We find that a lot of people come to the work because of trauma, because of these major obstacles that have really kept them stuck and unable to move forward in their life. And that's really where you spent a good majority of your professional career. Isn't that correct, Dr. Milbrandt?
Yes, definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, that's what we've been finding is that more and more and more, it's that trauma that keeps us blocked, that keeps us moving forward. We think that it's something on the outside, but then when we go inside and we really address these block points, it seems like so many things break free. And you've got a pretty extensive list of recovery tools and stuff like that. But you didn't come to this work from an academia perspective. I mean, you've got personal experience around this, correct?
Yeah, definitely. My work involves the intersection of mental health, addiction, and trauma. Trauma is kind of the common factor that really underlies both of them. But I've struggled with all of this in my life and done a lot of work around it. Thankfully, I'm in a place now where I am in recovery and I've gotten over a lot of my trauma, but it's given me a real passion for working with people that also struggle with this because I can relate to them. People know right away when they talk with me, like, okay, you get me and you're not going to judge me. And maybe you have something to offer that can help. And that's the path that I was supposed to walk. Unfortunately, it involved a lot of pain along the way, but in doing so, I was given some gifts, thankfully, to be able to give it back.
Wow. Yeah, I see time and time again that it's the place that we don't want to go, that trauma piece that seems to unlock the deepest pieces of power in ourselves. And you've done extensive mastery level research in regards to trauma due to your gift of trauma, really. And so can you explain to us a little bit? You've got a presentation in regards to where trauma comes from. Like it almost seems like you've got a deeper definition of trauma when I really started looking at what you're presenting.
Absolutely. And if you like, I'll go ahead and get started on that presentation.
Sure.
I just didn't want to step on anyone's toes once Scott got frozen out.
Oh my God.
We're grateful to have you.
Hey, I don't know what happens. It's every week something happens. It's like somebody takes control of my computer and it just gets like, it shuts down. I don't get it.
It was the universe telling you to stop talking, Dr. Scott.
There you go.
I'm sorry. It wasn't an accident. Let me just do a quick screen share here, so I can make sure. Now, can you guys see my slides?
Not yet. There we go. Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So, I got a great introduction. Thank you so much. I'm a little humbled when people start reading off my CV. There are a lot of things that I've done in my life, a lot of experiences, a lot of places that I've really been fortunate to go, places that, if there wasn't something behind the scenes running all of this, there's just no way I would have ended up with these people and these experiences, or even here at SoulQuest. I fully believe there's a plan and a path that I'll follow as long as I'm awake and pay attention. But even when I was still asleep, somehow it just unfolded exactly the way it was supposed to. And it's just, it amazes me to be on this adventure. So trauma and recovery, before I get into it, the two things, the manifesto, ayahuasca manifesto that was shared today, talking about taking you to the edge, to difficult experiences, unpacking the old and processing it, couldn't be more relevant to trauma. And then similarly with the Course in Miracles, talking about guilt resolution. And I would add to that shame, especially because guilt and shame tend to run hand in hand, although they are different things. Just a little bit more about myself right now. I am the medical director for SoulQuest. What does that mean? Well, I kind of oversee the safe and responsible use of this medicine. I'm not the only one that does that, but I'm the medical opinion to help people know kind of how to move forward, what medicines might be contraindicated and that sort of thing. And so making sure that we do this in a way that's helpful and not hurtful. Other things I'm involved in, I have a ketamine infusion clinic where I help people with treatment-resistant mood disorders. And I also work in an addiction treatment center here in Ocala, which is where I'm based. So this is what my presentation is going to look like today. We're going to start off with just a quick slide about some surprising statistics, get on to what is trauma, why does it matter, and then how do we begin to heal? And that last question is, of course, the most important, because none of these statistics are all that helpful if we can't do anything about it. But the good news is that we can. So surprising statistics. 1 in 5 Americans are sexually molested as a child. 1 in 5. You see a number like that and it just blows my mind. It's 1 in 5, not even 1 in 10. 1 in 4 are beaten by a parent to the point of leaving a mark. 1 in 3 couples engages in physical violence. 1 in 3. Think of 3 people, 3 couples you know. There's a good chance there's some violence in one of those relationships. 1 in 4 people grew up with alcoholic relatives, and 1 in 8 witnessed their mother being beaten or hit. These are appalling statistics, but it just goes to show you just how common some very obvious kinds of trauma are. So what is trauma? Let's go a little bit deeper with this. Trauma is any life event or series of events or ongoing events that creates a negative impact on life. It changes or distorts your sense of self or your place in the world. And basically what happens is it's an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one's ability to cope. So we'll get more specific here in the next slide. Examples of trauma. Some things are very obvious, like if you've been to war, you've been in combat, you witnessed genocide, you witnessed torture. I mean, that's obvious, but there's all kinds of trauma that people don't commonly think of as trauma. Now, things like abuse, obviously physical and sexual abuse, but what about emotional abuse or spiritual abuse? Even that, you can seem fairly obvious, but then let's get to the acts of omission as opposed to commission, abandonment and neglect. And the obvious one would be, the parents that disappear for days on end because of their addiction. But what about latchkey kids, where maybe both parents or the single parent work and there's little to no supervision and no involvement in their lives, and they're kind of left to fend for themselves? It doesn't have to be a bad situation, but it can lead to feelings of abandonment and that we don't feel like we're important enough to be paid attention to. Things like accidents, fires, natural disasters, random acts of violence. Something that's very relevant now, financial insecurity and job loss. With the downturn that we've had with COVID, that's really shaken up a lot of households. The sudden loss of loved ones, either through death, murder, or suicide. And in loved ones, I would consider not only our human loved ones, but our pets as well. It can be traumatizing. Terrorism, we don't have to directly witness this. By watching it over and over on TV and social media, we get a secondary trauma by the exposure to it. Another form of trauma is a chaotic home environment, either through divorce, domestic violence, alcoholism, multiple moves so that you can never put down roots and make connections with others. Bullying is a big one. Fortunately, one that we're a lot more sensitive to now, and there are school programs, trying to basically, out this. Still a problem, obviously, but at least people are talking about it. Interestingly, adoption can be a source of trauma. I have a good friend that helped me to understand this, and he struggled with feelings of, why did my parents not want me? It's so touching to hear him talk about this. I mean, it's just really, I didn't understand it before, because he grew up in his adoptive family, super nice, great people, but he was left with this lingering doubt and wonder, like, why didn't they want me? Other types of trauma, medical illness, mental health problems, not only for yourself, but in your family, in your immediate family, either a parent or a sibling. Also, if there's any addiction in the home, whether it's yourself or others. And then you get into a couple more interesting forms of trauma. There's this concept of birth trauma. And most of us kind of think that, I don't remember being born, but if you get into Stefan Grof's work, he talks about the basic perinatal matrices and some of the things that are imprinted on us during labor, which is actually a very physically traumatic event where you're squeezed and pushed through small holes and being made to feel trapped and that you can't get out. Very interesting stuff there, although I'm not going to dive into that. And then there's the idea of ancestral trauma, not just with our genetic lineage, which there are changes in DNA methylation that happen that are passed on from one generation to the next, that there is this handing down of trauma across generations. But also, you know, if you are someone who feels or believes in reincarnation, that we come back with the things that we have previously been through. And there's some interesting work looking at high dose LSD sessions where people remember several lives ago and things that they've gone through, and very traumatizing events, and how these same themes end up repeating over and over in subsequent times here on Earth. So interesting, lots of examples. Now you get into this idea of whether it's trauma with a capital T or a little t. And the capital T trauma are the obvious ones. You know, someone beat you up, you got shot, you witnessed, you know, some horrendous, terrible, all at once thing. Little t traumas are all those subtle things, you know, like the abandonment and the neglect, the small little things here and there that, you know, they don't seem like that big of a deal, but when they happen over and over and over again, especially at a young age, they change our world. Now, how does it change us? Well, it makes you feel that the world is unsafe, that people can't be trusted. And so what do? You put up defenses and walls to prevent further trauma. We figuratively tuck in and protect ourselves. No, don't touch me, I hurt. You know, whether that's literal touch or it's just physical touch, we protect ourselves, we wall ourselves off from others when actually what we really need is connection. If trauma is severe and acute enough, we actually completely block out the memory of events. And so, you know, you talk with some people and they say, oh, I had a great childhood, but I don't really remember much from my childhood. The first 10 years of life, I just don't have many memories. Oftentimes there are memories there. They've just been completely repressed because the things that happened during that period were so traumatizing that in order to deal with it, the mind blocked them out, stuffed them down, put them into the subconscious. They're still there. And the body does remember. The body keeps score, which is an allusion to a book I'll tell you about later in the presentation. But it's there. And you hear stories of people remembering these repressed memories and like, oh my gosh, I had this happen at a certain age and now I remember. It's the body's way of coping when something is so incredibly overwhelming. What it ends up doing, all of this though, is it leaves you with this pervading sense that something is wrong with you, that you need to constantly be on alert for danger, hypervigilant, that you are somehow broken or maybe unworthy or unlovable or not enough. And I just can't help but wonder how many of our listeners right now can identify with those feelings, the feeling of being not enough. So many things in life are driven by that. And we just assume that that's just the way it is, that we were told that we were that way at a very young age, and we just internalized it and it became our own internal dialogue that we just believed to be true when it really isn't. So why does any of this matter? Well, all of this drives an incredible amount of public health problems, things like depression, anxiety, PTSD. Just look at our veterans. 22 American veterans take their lives each day. It's an appalling statistic, and it's driven by this idea of PTSD, having witnessed and participated in things that they just can't deal with. Not only does it drive these acute mental disorders, but also it ruins your capacity for joy and intimacy. And this chronic stress, this chronic adrenaline and cortisol being jacked up leads to medical illnesses, susceptibility to infection, actually seems maybe even drive cancers of some types, and it shortens your lifespan. Importantly, trauma affects not only the trauma survivor, but it affects everyone around you. For instance, wives of men with PTSD, they become depressed. Children of depressed mothers grow up insecure and anxious, and children who witness family violence have difficulty establishing stable, trusting relationships as an adult because what they've seen demonstrated to them when they were young about what a grown-up relationship looks like was not healthy at all. They just have no imprint of what a good relationship looks like. So this is a really interesting study which kind of brings home why this matters. And this is called the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this was a large health maintenance organization that took 17,000 adults and surveyed them about their experiences during childhood. And they categorized these adverse childhood experiences in kind of 3 silos. One was abuse, so physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. The next category was neglect, either physical or emotional. And then the final category was household dysfunction. So some type of mental illness in the household, an incarcerated relative, a mother who they witnessed being treated violently, substance abuse in the household, or divorce. So if you just look at these 17,000 adults that didn't have any particular problems, they weren't like people that showed up to a treatment-resistant depression clinic or something. They were just people in this health maintenance organization. Turns out that in the abuse category, over 1 in 4 had suffered physical abuse as a child, 1 in 5 sexual abuse, and 1 in 10 emotional abuse. So these are they actually not witnessed, but they actually had this happen to them. Similarly, in the category of neglect, almost 15% experienced emotional neglect, around 10% physical neglect. In terms of household dysfunction, household substance abuse, a little bit more than 1 in 4. Parental divorce, also about 1 in 4. Household mental illness, 20%. Mother treated violently, a little bit more than 10%. So very, very common. So common, in fact, that if you look at these 17,000 adult participants, only 1 in 3 had experienced no adverse childhood events at all. The other 2/3 had experienced anywhere from 1 or more, and in fact, almost 13% had 4 or more adverse childhood events. Very, very common. Well, you say, okay, a lot of big things happen in their life. Why does that matter? Well, as it turns out, as the number of adverse childhood experiences increases, so does the risk for negative health outcomes in a direct linear relationship. So what are those adverse outcomes? The adverse outcomes fall into 2 categories, behavior and physical and mental health. In terms of behavior, having these types of outcomes as a child leads to these things as an adult: lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, missed work. Basically putting Band-Aids on top of those old wounds that were suffered at a much earlier point in life. In terms of physical and mental health, what we see are severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, sexually transmitted diseases, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, broken bones, things that happened as a child affecting people who are now full-grown adults. It's pretty amazing that it can have that kind of a lasting effect for things that might seem to be just common experiences. So the most manifest form of trauma is what you call post-traumatic stress disorder. There are different forms of post-traumatic stress. PTSD itself is a formal diagnosis that initially came up in people who've been through combat, although there's lots of experience that cause it too. Even without a formal diagnosis of PTSD, you can manifest a lot of symptoms of it. What are those symptoms? Well, things like avoiding thinking about the trauma, avoiding talking about it, being easily frightened in situations, experiencing negative mood or negative thinking about oneself, always being on guard, avoiding places that remind you of the trauma, avoiding activities that remind you, having flashbacks, not being able to concentrate, or acting out aggressively when you're triggered, having a loss of interest in activities, feeling guilt or shame, covering it up with substance abuse, having difficulties sleeping, or having bad dreams, nightmares. So treatment resistance. Unresolved trauma is the #1 reason for treatment resistance in mood disorders and in addiction. So people who, they've tried every antidepressant, they've tried talk therapy. Similarly, people who've been through multiple addiction treatment centers, those who multiply relapse, whether it's in their mood disorder or in their addiction, there's almost always trauma underlying the problem there. And if you don't address the trauma, it's going to be very difficult to recover from these problems. By working through the trauma, the treatment resistance often goes away, actually. And there is a reason behind these illnesses if we just stop and look and ask. Fortunately, awareness is getting much better about this now, and many more treatment centers, whether they deal strictly with mood disorders or addiction, are beginning to be trauma sensitive, trauma aware, trauma enabled, thankfully. So I want to give an example of a person here. And this person, his name's Pete. Pete's 50 years old. He was sexually abused at age 4. His first alcohol and tobacco exposure was at age 5. Also at that age, his parents divorced. He moved multiple times while in grade school to different cities and different states. He experienced bullying both at the playground and at daycare. He was an ostracized, overweight bedwetter. Attempts to ask for help weren't recognized. He began using alcohol and cannabis at age 13, developed anorexia and bulimia at age 14, became sexually promiscuous, somehow cleaned himself up for college and beyond, and began trying to numb his sense of inadequacy by accumulating accolades and awards and titles. More trauma came on. His first daughter was stillborn. His dad died suddenly. He plunged himself into workaholism and binge drinking, eventually finding amphetamines and cannabis as a further way to numb his pain. He finally got into recovery at age 47, but 2 years into recovery, remained unhappy, unfulfilled, and suicidal. Today, however, he's sober, happy, helping out others, and hopeful about the future. So what changed? But before I go on to explain what changed, this is my story. This is me. And I don't offer this up to engender pity or anything like that. I really offer this up to try and offer those of you out there who are still suffering, who haven't done the work to get through this kind of stuff, whose hearts are hurting, that there is a path forward to recovery. There really is. When you do the trauma work, things get so much better. And so this is just a way of me offering experience, strength, and hope that even as bad as this looks, it really can and does get better. So how does trauma get better? You think, gosh, what a mess. How do we clean this up? Recovery takes work. It's a process. It takes time. I came across a great quote the other day, and it goes like this: to heal your wounds, you must be willing to take off the Band-Aids. And what do Band-Aids look like in life? Well, a lot of the more obvious ones are addictions, whether they're substance related or shopping related or sex related or other obsessive compulsive type activities, workaholism, excess exercise. I mean, you name it. You find an activity, you can find a way to use it to excess to numb out and not feel your feelings. You got to be able to take those Band-Aids off. You got to be willing to take a look at the difficult things that lie underneath if you really want to get better. And that's some scary stuff. And many people, the idea of looking at the past and analyzing and talking about it is terrifying. But I'm here to tell you that once you start doing the work, man, does it get good. It really, really gets good. And we organize trauma work in kind of 3 categories. I'm going to briefly mention them here, and then I have slides after this to go deeper. The first is a top-down approach. And top-down approach basically is about talking, about reconnecting with others, about allowing ourselves to know and understand what's going on with us while processing the memory of the trauma. The next category is medicines and other technologies. And basically, this is a way to change the way the brain organizes and relates to memories and to help shut down inappropriate alarm reactions. And the third category is what we call bottom up. And this is the idea of allowing your body to have experiences that deeply and viscerally contradict the feelings of helplessness, rage, or collapse that often result from trauma. So let's go a little deeper with those. All right, top down, not talk down. Talking, connecting, and processing. And what does this look like? Well, this is often done in groups. It's led by a trained trauma facilitator that knows how to go deep, how to push, and how to pull back. What you do is provide a safe space for people to be heard, a place where you can share your stories in a variety of ways. Writing assignments are really common. And some of the things that I do with people is have them write about a story. My heart broke when, and then you fill in the blank and write me a page about it and come back to the group and share that experience. And what I find, what others have found and I've learned, is that bringing those experiences, those writing assignments to the group and sharing them, typically all the way around the room, people start going, yeah, I had that happen too. Let me tell you about what it was like for me. I can relate. Yeah, you know what? You're not the only one, and I'm not the only one. Suddenly we start getting the sense of community and oneness, where before all we felt was separateness and disconnection. Other types of ways to share a story. I mean, not everyone enjoys writing. Some people can't stand to write. They can't write. Don't have hands. I don't know. Writing is not for everybody. But other things you can do, collage work, pulling out different pictures and stories and other things from stacks of magazines and making a collage. It sounds very, second grade-ish, but it's a powerful way to get out of your head and into your heart and begin sharing your story. And so you bring the collage to the group and you talk through the collage. And this way, people who kind of have that writer's block can find a way to share their story by getting out of their head. You can do the same thing with painting or drawing. One particular technique that was really powerful for me when I first started doing trauma work is what's called psychodrama, where you act out experiences between yourself and other significant people in your family or in your life. You can confront people who perhaps harmed you. For me, it was confronting my dad. Dad died before I got into recovery, and I had a lot of regrets around that. Parents were divorced when I was young, didn't see him a lot. He was, workaholic, and I had a lot of issues, a lot of daddy issues. I mean, who doesn't, right? But I definitely had them in spades. And in this psychodrama, it was in my first trauma intensive that I did with a really talented group of people. It was a 5-day, 8 hours a day thing. And the person I picked to play my dad was this huge, burly dude who had spent 10 years in maximum security prison, had tattoos all over his face. He was one scary dude. My dad didn't look like that, but my heart knew to pick this guy. And I confronted him in front of the group. And the anger and the rage that came out, I mean, I didn't plan what I was going to say. I just talked to him, and it was explosive. I didn't hit him or touch him or anything. You're not allowed to do that in psychodrama. But it was the rage that came out. People were worried that I was going to, and I'm not a violent person, I'm not. But there was so much of that buried there that when it finally came out, it was explosive. But in the end of that drama, after we had played it out, the two of us ended up in each other's arms, hugging, crying together, and just sharing love. It was absolutely beautiful. That guy, he's a really good friend now. His name is Tim. And that was the start of my healing with my dad. I'm really, really thankful for that. Other sorts of ways that you can share an experience. Music is really powerful. Music is a hugely powerful one for me. I mean, you see that at SoulQuest. I mean, listen to the music soundtracks during your retreats or even afterwards. I mean, I listen to them in my truck on the way to work. And I mean, if I need to pull myself out of the world and into a healing place, there's just certain tracks that I'll play that I know will take me there right away. And you can do the same thing in groups, just trying to get people to open up their hearts to a point where they actually can go to those vulnerable places and share. You can also do this with media. There are several different movies that are really powerful for doing this. You watch the movie and you discuss afterwards. Even something like Ebenezer Scrooge, which seems like a weird one, but there are so many money messages in there, and it's a great tool to examine the money scripts and the ideas of scarcity and other things that drive some of our bizarre behaviors around money and around our things that we own. So what happens in groups like this is, in sharing, we find that we're not alone, that others have been there too. We find connection and support and community. And I know SoulQuest gets this because that's part of what goes on every weekend at SoulQuest. It's about finding community. There's so much power in working with others. In doing so, you find hope and encouragement. You realize that we're not freaks. We're not broken. We're not damaged goods. We're not bad seeds. We are people who have worth and value, regardless of what we've done or what has been done to us. And that is such a beautiful thing. I love working in groups. It's one of my favorite activities. that I do each week. It can be a terrifying thing for some people because, like some people are like, I have a hard enough time doing one-on-one counseling. How am I going to bare my soul in the middle of a bunch of people I don't know? Take that risk. When you do, amazing things happen. Love group work. So medicines. So traditional pharmaceuticals like antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicines, so your Prozac and your Xanax, they tend to blunt emotions rather than helping you to process and integrate emotions. Now, there are definitely times and places where these things are necessary. Without a doubt, they are helpful medications, but when you really come to a point of wanting to do this work, if you're completely numbed out on Xanax and Prozac, it's going to be really hard to tap into your heart and process and feel in the way that you need to begin to move forward. Things that you can use that aren't quite so blunting, adrenaline blockers like clonidine and propranolol block that adrenaline surge so that when you get a panic attack or an anxiety attack, that you don't have that fast heart rate, the rapid breathing, and the panicky feeling. So blocking adrenaline can be really nice while still leaving your heart open. Now, with a group like this, of course, I don't have to mention psychedelic assisted therapy, but I'm going to, because these medicines are powerful ways to activate and process emotions. So rather than blunting emotions like antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicines, they actually activate and enhance emotions and open up your heart in a way that can be loving and gentle, although it can be difficult and challenging. But if properly supported psychologically, this can be a gold mine and turn maybe one retreat weekend being equivalent to a year's worth of psychotherapy or more. And so medicines, when used safe and responsibly with the right set and setting, can be an awesome way to supercharge your recovery process and working through your trauma. And as you can see, there's a bunch of medicines listed there. MDMA is kind of in a separate category, but there's some great work going on with that and PTSD right now. Psilocybin, ayahuasca, LSD, 5-MeO-DMT, mescaline, ketamine as well. Separate category, not really a psychedelic, although you can, ketamine has a way of opening the heart in addition to helping the neurochemistry, which also can be very healing. So other technologies, this is a fun one. Holotropic breathwork, although there's a ton of different kinds of breathwork out there. The one I have experience with is holotropic breathwork. Stefan Grof, he pioneered this. It's a way of getting into non-ordinary states of consciousness. Basically, you kind of hyperventilate for about an hour, hour and a half to very deep moving tribal beats and loud music. And it's done in a group, with supported facilitators. And the first time I did breath work, I turned into a hawk. And ever since then, the hawk has been my spirit animal. I see them everywhere I go. There's one that lives in my neighborhood that flies down in the yard all the time. On my run this morning, I saw at least 2 hawks. I'm somehow connected with them. I find their feathers on my running path. But I literally became the hawk. And in another breathwork session, I actually could feel my wings flapping and flying. This wasn't so much about healing trauma, though. I think it was a vision of strength and purpose, of power and moving forward. Just good stuff. Importantly, in breath work, probably about the 5th time I did it, this was during some trauma training I was doing with a large group of about 20 or 25 people. And I really finally tapped into my abandonment issues. And I was probably an hour into this session. And I just remember coming to this realization that I was completely alone, that everyone had left me, that everyone had abandoned me. And I was just sobbing and crying. It was just, my heart was just open. And the facilitator, who was my trainer, she just came up behind me and gently put her hands on my face and caressed my face and mothered me in the way that I needed to be mothered, and just showed love and acceptance. And it was all okay after that. And I learned that I could do that same thing for myself, that I actually, in times of stress and distress, can just gently caress my face and dry my tears and take care of myself. And that was just from breath work. Wow, amazing, amazing stuff. other kinds of tools. There's something called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's this little kind of trick where you kind of move back and forth while processing trauma memories. And it's kind of hard to explain, but for some people, it can really help people reorganize their thinking, their memories, their relationship to their trauma. I've never done it myself, but I'd love to try it. It sounds like a really cool technique, and it's very promising, and it is available. Most places, you can get a referral at where you live. Something really cool is going on, neurofeedback. So they basically hook you up to an EEG, a brainwave tracing, and there's a computer program, and through giving you visual feedback, you can actually train your brain to maximize the alpha and the theta waves, which these are the theta waves are waves that you see typically in a deep state of meditation. The alpha waves are about relaxation and being open. And it is almost a computer generated way of getting into a non-ordinary state where the default mode network shuts off. So just like breathwork can do it, neurofeedback can do it. I haven't tried this either, but I've been to a couple places where I got to see it demoed, and I'm like, man, I've got to try this. It sounds like a really awesome technique. Now let's go to bottom up. Bottom up is about empowerment and agency meaning the sense that you are in control of your destiny. These experiences, the idea is to allow the body to experience, again, deeply and viscerally, experiences that contradict that sense of helplessness, rage, or collapse that result from trauma. And these can be things like martial arts training, yoga. There's this concept of communal rhythm. So basically getting together and drumming together with a large group of people. There's something very powerful about that in expressing this community and rhythm and the pounding. You can get even deeper. Getting involved in theater is a surprising way, either improv theater or even just like local community center kind of stuff. Being able to get up and portray, have a sense of mastery, to move about the stage, to command the audience. This is a way of giving people back their voice. Again, it doesn't sound like it would be therapy, but it is therapeutic and helpful and healing. It's been shown in a number of studies. This next one I call dummy therapy. I didn't have a better term for it, but you can buy these trauma dummies. So they look like an assailant on a stick, right? It's a rubberized body, kind of a bland face, on a very heavy base, and you can put on gloves and punch the crap out of it. I mean, it's a way of physically getting this rage out. I've seen people, they'll make a picture of the person who did what they did to them, whether it was sexual, physical, whatever, put the picture on this dummy and just wail on the dummy until the point they're so exhausted from punching, you basically just fall over. But in doing so, suddenly you change from being this helpless person that something was done to this empowered person that can do something about what happened and reclaim their sense of agency over their self. Safe destruction is another one. So, one example was did a big tracing on a big piece of paper, life-size tracing of their assailant, including a lot of details and things like that. Took it outside, had a ceremony, and set the sucker on fire. I mean, you don't want to do that with a real person, but you can definitely do that with this stand-in, if you will. Even people who aren't even on this earth anymore, you can confront in a way that is safe and helpful rather than a way that's going to end you up in jail. So, talked about a lot of things today. What if you need more? And we've touched on some different ideas. First, of course, I would send you to Soul Quest. Retreat weekends are a great way to begin working through your trauma. You've got all kinds of support and love all around you throughout the entire weekend. Take advantage of the online integration groups after your retreat weekend. Integration work is so important, and you can get it for free as opposed to having to pay $100 or more an hour somewhere else. Take advantage of this. The revelations that you get during your retreat weekends, in order to maximize them, even if you're not healing from trauma, but definitely if you are, take advantage of the integration groups. Super important. I've taken advantage of these myself, and because of that, I've really done some good healing work. There's also individual coaching and counseling available through Soul Quest. If you're a reader, if you like to read, Much of what I presented today comes from this book by Bessel van der Kolk, who's a psychiatrist, called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a really good book. It's very approachable. He does a great job of summarizing the evidence, including some of the things that I've mentioned here, talking about what trauma is, how it works, why it affects us the way it does, why we behave like we do. He gets into this idea of developmental trauma disorder, which is different than PTSD, but something that with all the different kinds of trauma that I showed you, many people will manifest this developmental trauma disorder in adulthood. I did my trauma training with a group called Spirit to Spirit. It's run by a lady named Judy Crane. She's here in Ocala. She runs a place called the Guest House, which is a really, really nice trauma treatment facility. They train people to do this kind of work. I did my first intensive as a client. I liked it so much, I went ahead and did a year's worth of training with them, 200 hours worth, basically, went through this cohort over a year with another 20 some odd people who, these people know me better than anyone on the planet. They know all my stuff. I've aired all my trauma. They've seen my heart. I've seen their heart. When you go through something like that with a group of people, oh my gosh, it is so, so powerful. And so if you're interested in either the 5-day intensives that Judy does, or you want to maybe get some training in this area, go check out the website that's listed right there. So in summary, trauma, incredibly common, majorly impactful. It changes the way we feel about ourselves, our sense of safety, and how we relate to the world. And there is a way forward to healing, but it requires work and it takes time. And you've got to be willing to rip those Band-Aids off if you're going to get to the wound. But I can say without a doubt, no matter how challenging it is, the results are well worth the effort. My life is awesome now. I get to do some things that are just mind-blowing in terms of the people I get to interact with, the people that are in my life, the love that is in my life, the love that I'm able to share with others. None of this would have been possible had I not done the work. I'd still be that miserable person in recovery who was hurting and didn't understand why. So thanks for your attention, and entertain any questions at this time.
All right, Dr. Eric, thank you so much. Amazing. Hey, I'm curious about the, we had, Abraham Maslow, who, really studied the model of what's healthy, what's a healthy person, as opposed to an abnormal psychology or studying, what's wrong with people and how they get broken. So what's the model for the healthy person? So you've come through trauma. You have negative self-image, you have, behavior that's expressing. And so then how does a person know what's supposed to be right? Like, what's the anatomy of the recovery? Like, if I'm coming from low self-esteem, where am I supposed to go?
Wow, that's a great question.
Like, what's the model that's the healthy one?
Well, suffice to say, we all have some trauma. Some of us just have a whole lot more than others. And regardless of where we're at on the journey, if we're willing to look inward and be open and trust the process, we can work more closely towards our true self. I mean, really, that's what the goal is to find our true self, to shed the things about us that the ego has created. These defenses, these masks that we wear, to find the path that we are supposed to walk. So in my opinion, that's really the goal. But in these human vessels, in these fragile vessels that we live in, we will always be imperfect, and we will always fall some degree short of the true self. But we can continue to work towards that and learn from our mistakes and just march forward on the path. And that can be a very beautiful thing.
So the true self would be the authentic self.
Yes.
So where feelings that are being expressed, whether they're positive or negative, are not hidden, where they're owned and they're shared. The true self is the one that gets to be instead of get shut down and diminished and shrunk. So yeah. I'm fascinated by your topic. I think that you've done a fantastic job in in organizing it and analyzing it. I would like to open up the call and you really give folks a chance to ask some questions here. Anybody would like to go raise their hand or just
Doug Hoffman has his hand raised.
All right, Doug, go ahead. Hi, brother. Can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
Doug, there you, Doug, your audio is not coming on. It looks like you're unmuted. Check your microphone. Make sure your microphone's hooked up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I'll get a headset.
And
He's
we're
gonna come back.
Yeah. And we'll circle back with you, Doug. We'll go ahead.
I have a question for you, Dr. Eric. So you mentioned a lot of the integration, and then you mentioned the psychedelics, and you mentioned set and setting, and there's a lot of people there. There's a lot of talk about how in the 60s, one of the challenges we had was that psychedelics went too mainstream and everybody was using it in unhealthy ways. And then you talked about integration. Can you speak to a little bit about set and setting and the importance of having a guide that understands what's going on and what that looks like a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that there was a lot of harm done back in the late 60s, not just directly to people who were experimenting, but to the whole movement, because of these sensational things that were portrayed in the media, we lost research access and medical access to these healing compounds. But getting back to set and setting, so set is the mindset that you're going into the experience with. And the setting is the place in which you're doing it. And it includes not just the environment, but the physical support. Both of them are hugely important. Let's take an extreme example. You take some sort of psychedelic and you go and watch a movie that is all about killing people and really graphic violence and all that. That'd be a horrible example of a setting to be in. At Soul Quest, it's all about love. It's about shamanic music and healing. There's this preparation. There is a ceremony involved in it. So setting your intention. Similarly, mindset, going in with the right mindset, realizing that one needs to be open to the experience. Much suffering comes from resistance and from not letting go and from running away from our fears. And in terms of healing with psychedelic assisted therapies, we have to be willing to embrace our fears, to let go of our expectations, and to trust the process. So being prepared in advance for that can make a huge difference. If you just take an uninitiated person and send them into the woods with a bag of mushrooms and tell them to have a good time, they might be helped and they might be hurt. And you also mentioned the idea of having support, having a supportive person around, so that if things do get difficult, that you can be re-grounded and reassured, and to know that it's okay to trust, to let go, and to be open. So never good to be by yourself. Definitely don't ever recommend anyone do psychedelics on their own. Always be with a sitter. That can be in a group. It doesn't have to be one-to-one, but someone who can be there if things get difficult, so that you don't come to harm, either acutely or chronically.
Thank you. Doug, are you able to, did you get your mic working?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. There you go, brother.
Gotcha.
How are you?
Yeah, great. Good morning. And thank you, Doctor, for one wonderful presentation this morning. It's truly beautiful. My question is, I've been working with medicine and doing this type of work for about 2 years now. I've never experienced anger or rage until the last retreat that I went on, dealing with some father issues, abandonment at the age of 13. I've done a lot of work over the years forgiving my father at an intellectual level. When you're 13, all you know is you need your dad. You don't understand those adult things about adult things, And then when you get older and understand adult things, then it's a little easier to forgive. But I found that I trapped those emotions down inside and they needed a place to come out. And I hit that at Soul Quest last retreat. And I feel like there's more anger to deal with. I've always kind of felt like anger is a bad thing, and I think like you're weird or not right if you have anger, and I suppress it. I have fear about getting into this rage because I'm a physically really big guy. I'm a big rugby player, and I'm afraid to get into this anger work. I don't know what's going to happen. I honestly don't know if this is just going to be an explosion like a volcano. And I'm almost afraid to embark on this work with the anger and the rage. Do you have any recommendations or ideas for maybe how someone in my position, my background, might approach this in a safe and healthy way to start doing this work?
That is a great question. Witness what I talked about earlier when I did the psychodrama, portraying my relationship with my dad. I didn't expect that at all. I don't know, because I trusted the group. I mean, there's another good example where set and setting makes a difference. If you're in a situation where you have trusted people around you, I mean, there are ways to bring down the intensity, even if something erupts big time, to reground people if they get flooded, to just bring things quickly back down to a place where it's more manageable, if it really explodes like that. Now, psychodrama would be one obvious way, again, done with a supportive group, people who know what they're doing. Writing projects can be really good. I've written some really difficult letters to my dad. Some where I've gone off, some where I really just expressed how much I miss him, because he's gone. I've written letters in return from him, the letters that I would have wanted to have received. He wasn't much of a writer. So writing is another way to work through it. But just like psychedelic work, don't do it alone. Be with someone that you trust and that knows what they're doing, and then you can't go wrong, really. Now, parenthetical comment. Your bike on the wall here, I used to be a competitive triathlete, and I really like that bike, man. That is sharp.
We got a few of them up there.
I used to have quite a few too, and I got to a point where I was too obsessed with the sport and about winning, and I retired from it, and I sold all my bikes except for my mountain bikes, because I didn't want it to own me anymore. And I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with having a bunch of tri bikes, for sure, man. I love the sport, but eventually for me, it got to be an obsession that I was using to boost my low self-worth with accolades and titles. It's before I did the trauma work.
I've been through that, over the peak and down the other side, where I do this for fun and moving meditation. And I can truly say today, I simply do not care if I podium or not. And that's the truth. Excellent. Ironically, ever since taking that relaxed attitude, I podium now more than ever before, but I just don't care.
Excellent. That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful.
Hey, Doug,
thank you for everything today.
Doug, I wanted to ask you just a question about your comment. Or your question. Did I understand you correctly to say that you're apprehensive about accessing that vault of anger?
That's correct. I'm afraid of it. I really have no clue what's gonna come up if I get into that, and I'm a little bit afraid of what I'm gonna find down there. Yeah.
What are you afraid might happen?
Like a physical explosion, like an instance where I may not remember what happens, an instance where there may be some physical happening that thank you, that could be harmful to me or others, that I'm completely out of my mind and don't recall, control. I basically, what in a nutshell, Scott, I'm afraid of losing control if I get into this.
Doug, let me ask you a question. So because you've got this deep fear of this anger, is there any way that you actually see this come out sideways, where that anger is down there, but you're shoving it down and it finds a way to come up sideways in your life and it's impacting you in pretty negative ways? Or is it just something that's down there?
for years, it's come out in sarcasm. It's come out in saying the wrong things at the wrong time. It's come out in self-sabotage. It's come out in lost jobs. It's come out in a number of ways. And I can't say that yes, I 100% am sure that that's how it came out sideways, but that's what resonates with me. That's what I believe. I believe that this suppressed anger has come out in ways that have affected me in a negative way, and I'm ready for that to end. I'm ready for that negativity and those side instances, so we put it. I'm ready for that to not be a part of my life anymore.
And that's an interesting part, Dr. Eric. You know, we talk about how trauma, PTSD, the extreme forms, and the impact it has through addiction and stuff like that. But here's a prime example of how trauma it's almost like an untangible tangible, where, you know, Doug, you're not alone. I mean, it's I think it's 99% of the population. You know, we have these trauma points, and they don't necessarily, maybe they don't get us to lose our jobs, or maybe they don't get us to go into addiction, but obviously that it's there, and if it's not worked through, it's limiting who we could be and living to the fullest.
Mm-hmm. I could just echo that, definitely. You know, again, if we may not be carrying around this homicidal maniac inside of us, but if there is this wellspring of trauma that has been repressed, it does come out sideways. You can, and the thing is, like, one thing will come along, and it's the final thing that the container just can't hold anymore, and then, you know, it comes out. And so doing the trauma work, you begin to lower that level of sort of stored and repressed energy, if you will, so that it gets down to the point where it's much more manageable. And I caught a question in the chat. I haven't been able to keep a close eye on that because I get too distracted. But one was asking, is trauma healed permanently? And it's a process for sure. There can be big chunks of healing that you do that relieve a lot of that reservoir of trauma. But I still get triggered by my dad. I do. It's not anything. It doesn't have the kind of power that it used to over me. And so when it does happen, it doesn't wreck my day or anything else. And I just allow myself to experience the feeling, to grieve for it if that's what's appropriate, and to breathe through it, and then to move on. So at least for me, getting that to the point where instead of this explosive or day-wrecking, that's going to come out, and I get triggered, it gets down to something manageable that I know how to deal with, that I actually can move forward and learn from, rather than run in terror from it.
I would just add, Doug, that you know, when we do our ceremonies, right, we lean into those shadowed, those dark spaces, and because we've got to get through them. And so if that vault of pain and anger and rage is what you have to get through, then having, like Dr. Eric said, this safe setting that will, you know, where you could have the space held for you so that you can lose your shit. You can scream. And, you know, I know when I was in school, that one of the ways that we dealt with anger and rage from trauma was with these rubber hoses, and, you know, just, you know, pounding things and beating things, you know, constructively, but as a discharge of that energy from your body, because it's a connection. There needs to be an alchemical shift that happens in the brain for the release to happen. And so having some external expression of it ritually, or, you know, ceremonially, or just, you know, with physical, you know, exertion, it's a way of draining that, you know, that charge. But I would not hold back from this, you know, this notion through your comments about the labels that you've put on it, in terms of it's too much, or it might be, I might forget who I am, I might lose control, I might. It sounds like a way of you know, protecting the wound, and really not coming up with a solution because of the might. You know, I would really encourage you to, you know, keep doing that kind of deep work. But if you're here at SoulQuest and you have that stuff coming up, you know, maybe a smaller ceremony, maybe a private ceremony, where, you know, there's people there that can truly hold space for you. We've had, you know, great big guys who have gone into, huge reactions of, rage and anger and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah, been there.
yeah, you've been there. And it is where this work is done. So it's like, really the question is, why would you not want to go through that if that is the way you get through it onto the other side? It's messy, snot bubbles and pounding the ground and, all that. You're not going to be allowed to hurt yourself if you've got a supportive team around you, right? They're going to make sure that you're safe. And, it's got to come out in your own way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It can't come out, a way that I think it should happen or somebody else. It's got to come out the way it needs to come out. Like in the holotropic breath work, stuff comes out in very unusual ways. And you just got to let it happen. So, and that's all about set and setting, as Dr. Eric was talking about. So, all right, brother.
Thank you both. It's taken me 2 years with this work to get to this point where I can say, okay, here's my next mountain. This is the big one, or another big one at least. And I'm ready to embark. It's time. Thank you both.
Yeah.
Awesome
All right,
stuff.
Ron had a question, and I think Melissa had one after that.
Well, I had an experience years ago in a group therapy setting where there was a woman who was just horribly abused in 2 events. One, she was imprisoned by some South American activists and raped, and then she was a nun in China, and she was imprisoned for a long time, and she started to starve herself. And then in one day, like, she decided to go ahead and eat these meals that were just like accumulated, and they had awful parasites in them. And the psychiatrist said that she needed to face this trauma, and she was suffering from cancer. She was getting cancer treatment, and she was she had a blunted affect. And she said, "No, I can't do it. No, I can't do it. I can't do it." And then he just forced her. He said, "No, Nancy, you have to face this." And she just started screaming so loud the police came to the door because the neighbors called. And it struck me how amazing and brave this woman was, and she actually, her cancer went into remission after that.
Thank you, Ron.
Really, really good story, Ron. Thanks for sharing that. There's all kinds of stories in that book that I mentioned, Body Keeps Those Score, looking at incidences like that where, medical illnesses, once the trauma was dealt with, the medical illnesses went away. I mean, just look at all the GI stuff that goes on, stress-related ulcers. There's an inflammatory and a stress component to many cancers. Migraine headaches. I mean, just the list goes on and on. I mean, we worry and stress ourselves to death, quite literally.
Literally, yeah.
And it's interesting. You mentioned that the psychiatrist really pushed the person, and there's an art to that of knowing when to push and when to pull back, because there are times when people just aren't ready, and that's okay. Like, just because you have to confront something doesn't mean you have to confront it today. It may be that you're supposed to confront it tomorrow or some other time, but be willing to, when the time comes, that if you've been shown that it's something you need to work on, as Dr. Scott was saying, at some point lean into it and work through it, because you really have to walk through it to get to the other side.
I think one of the keys is to have your spiritual strength with you in doing this kind of work, because that's where your true self is in your spiritual aspect of yourself. You bring that love and light into the trauma so that it can be, healed and corrected. Melissa, did you want to share? Okay, and then we'll go to Jan Marie has some things from the chat, I think. And go ahead, Melissa.
I was super interested in your discussion of the ACE scores, which I've heard about before, but not in that much detail. And I was just curious if you had any insight on techniques or I guess things that the medical community is now doing now that they recognize the implication of childhood trauma on the trajectory of people's health to impede on the traumatization of children as it's happening, or to provide people and children with the skills to kind of recognize that they're in a traumatic situation, but not allow that trauma to overwhelm them and become a problem that could maybe lead to later medical issues?
Great question. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You know, if you want to go back to that, I mean, why wait until you're 30, 40, 50, or however old to deal with the after effects? Looking at prevention, dealing with it now. And so if you go, there's a website, I can't remember the exact URL, but if you put in ACEs study, there's actually a website devoted entirely to this. They have all the latest press releases, the programs that were going on. And there's a number of community programs, you know, everything from, you know, reducing violence in the home to obviously addressing addiction and things like that as well. And I'm not well versed in all those programs. I just know that people are actively working in those areas because that's really where we ought to go, right? I mean, why wait until people are really hurting to the point that maybe they've taken their lives? Why not nip it in the bud? I know that some of the things that I went through as a child, I mean, I can hypothesize, but if, you know, I did reach out some and ask for help and people didn't understand what I was asking for. You know, my life would probably have had a different trajectory if I got the help that I needed then. But, you know, that being said, I've also come to the point that I realized I had to walk through those things in order to do what I'm doing now. So, you know, again, I think we should work to prevent that. But, you know, you can, even if you've had to go through those things, you can turn it into a gift that you can use to help others once you've worked through it. Really good question. I think someone put the ACEs link there in the chat box. Thanks, Darlene.
Okay, so Jan Marie, did you have some questions from the chat?
Yeah, Angela had a question. She made a statement, but she also has a question, so she's going to ask it now.
Yes. Hey guys, thank you so much. It's been an amazing service. Dr. Eric, I was really impressed with the timeline of traumatic events that you put together, even though it was seems that it would be pretty traumatic to do, but very helpful. And I was just wondering if it's something that someone can do and actually work on alone. I mean, I love all of the group work, but you know, just I like to work on things every day, kind of all day in my life. And I'm just wondering if putting together a list is something that can be done on my own, you know, work through on my own, and, you know, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I would say, I mean, I'm a big believer in groups. It happens to be what really works for me. And a big chunk of trauma is feeling separated from others that you are not a part of. And so, you know, part of becoming and working through things with a group is then become a part of, and you feel connection and trust and healthy relationships and people you can air your stuff with. So I wouldn't advise to do it completely on your own, but there are definitely some places you could start. You know, just picking up Vanderkolk's book and reading through that to begin to understand. He really, I mean, as I'm reading through it, I'm either recognizing my own story or other people who I've worked with. I mean, they're just like, oh yeah, that was, you know, this person or this person. And so and he doesn't just focus on the problem, he focuses on the solutions too. And there's a whole, like the last third of the book is all various different solutions. I didn't touch on all of them. There's some others in there that might be a little bit better adapted to individual work, kind of a workbook sort of thing. I think he has links to worksheets too, if I remember correctly, for a couple of the techniques. I just can't remember for sure. But I would say, you know, no matter what you do on your own, well, okay, let me back up for a second. I do a lot of work on my own. For me, I read forgive me, I read a crap load of psych literature. I just do. I learn so much from that. And I journal every day about whatever's going on in my life the day before. It helps me process through things. And I've learned to do that. I did that even before I started doing formal trauma work. And so there definitely are tools you can use, meditation. I'm to the point now where I do breath work on my own now that I do know how to self-soothe. So that's an option as well. But certainly early on, when you're working through some of the more challenging things, it really helps to have someone, walk in lockstep with you in order to work through things. It's much like recovering from addiction. You can do it on your own, but it's a heck of a lot harder.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think you just made me think about the fact that I did spend a ton of years trying to do everything on my own. So something good to think about. I do love having community now to work with. Thank you.
Asking for help it doesn't come easy. And especially for those of us that are trauma survivors, because we were taught that asking for help wasn't safe. And so learning to do that is powerful, not only for ourselves, but for the people who then help us. Not allowing someone to help me or asking them for help, I deprive them of the pleasure of helping. I really enjoy helping people. I love to see people work through their trauma. And so, being asked to help out with something like that, I find it tremendously fulfilling. And so, getting back to the idea that, I don't want to be a burden, I don't want to ask, and they may not, whatever excuse you come up with, asking for help is difficult, but it is a very important part of healing.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Dr. Eric, we have another question from Gina, and then we're going to go to Dimitri. Go ahead, Gina.
Hi, I was asking a question. I became a stepmother to a child that suffered severe trauma abuse when she was with her biological mother. Her biological mother got terminated her rights because she wouldn't follow the plan. And the child, well, she's a teenager now, is in such denial that we can't even move forward to healing. And she has expressed that at age 18, she will return to her mother in a very unhealthy environment. How do you help someone who refuses to even recognize the truth to begin the process of healing?
That is a tough question. It gets at the underlying concept that there are these trauma bonds that we develop where the relationship between the abuser and the abused is very dependent sometimes. You think of gaslighting as a really good example of this, and you convince someone that they're worthless and they can't do anything without you, and this and that, and then suddenly they're dependent on you. They think they can't do anything without you, and that's a very classic trauma scenario where there's an abuser and abused. And the person who's been abused,
she's also become now, because her, as you said, the trauma comes out. So now her anger, her sadness, her depression is directed at us very strongly. So
that sounds a lot like me at that age. I was a really angry adolescent, and it came out like that. And I wasn't ready to ask for help at the time. I went to a couple of counselors, and it just didn't gel. You can't, anytime there is a recovery process, the person has to want it. Their pain has to be great enough that they actually want to do the work it takes to heal. And so, the adage, you can lead a horse to water. I don't mean to be discouraging, but maybe there's other ways.
Oh no, we've been through enough with therapists that we get it.
Yeah. I mean, all you can really do, is be supportive and not enabling. Set healthy boundaries and make help available when the person decides they want it. God, that's a tough one. I feel for you. I think of, I've got 4 kids, 10, 13, 16, and 17. And thankfully they're doing all right. But man, if I had a kid that was like me, I would really have a hard time with that. I don't know what I would do, but I'd like to think now that I have this knowledge, I would somehow find a way to get them help. But if they're stubbornly resistant to it, I can't force them. It's like I can't force my kid to do dishes, I mean, I might have some leverage, but in the end, they're going to do it or they're not going to do it. And similarly with embracing working through trauma.
Gina, I might add.
Thank you.
Yeah, Gina, I might add that sometimes experiential types of therapy can really create some effects like camps, like summer camp or experiences where, like they had Outward Bound or, I don't know if she's one of those that could, would go to an experience place where they're
That's a possibility for sure.
put into an entirely different environment where they are forced to survive and bond with other people and develop some other parts of themselves. So yeah. Nice to see
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
You too.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you. We have two more questions, one from Dimitri, and then we're going to go to Corey.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dimitri.
Hi, I posted on the chat. I'm gonna say it right now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir. It's a
So,
little quiet. If you could speak up, it would be helpful.
So I was someone went over, came out to my family members and mentioned something that was entirely not true, and we found out later that person was a victim of sexual abuse. But we never touched that subject again. How do I deal around people that actually were traumatized? Do I confront them? Do I approach that? Or do I just leave it alone? I know it's a very gentle subject, so I don't want to say anything wrong,
There's no short answer for that. It depends on your relationship with the person.
I met him one time in my life. That was the only one time that I met him. They made an assumption and they just went out. When, talked to someone else, those people were watching me. It was a quiet, it rocked me. It was a big thing, so I really did not know how to deal with that.
It's definitely difficult if you don't have a relationship, with a trusting relationship, to even begin to breach those subjects. Although it can be done, what I primarily do is I try to share some experience, strength, and hope. That's what I do in groups. If we're kind of at a standstill and no one's opening up, I'll share a difficult story that I've been through and kind of how I made it through. And there's even an exercise, and this is very tangential, but ways of drawing people out. There's an exercise called All My Friends, and you do it in a group, and someone gets in the middle and says, all my friends that suffer from an eating disorder or something, and everyone who had that jumps into the circle, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea there were so many people. Obviously, you couldn't do that with this person. I mean, that wasn't the right setting, but there are ways to kind of come at things sideways that aren't really head on, that don't just charge in and scare people away, because trauma survivors, if they do anything, they do defense really well. And I'm not gonna let you in if I think you're gonna hurt me. You're gonna be out quickly. So you got to be subtle. You got to take your time and develop a relationship where it would be appropriate to even do that.
Dimitri, did I hear you correctly that the person that you're talking about who has been traumatized, were they projecting that you had done something?
Correct. They're saying that they saw me once and they said that I was kissing my child inappropriately.
Right.
Oh, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So that would be you're in your truth, your innocence lies. And so, you're not responsible for what other people think, and it's a horrible thing to be accused of. Mm-hmm. And especially if it gets if it gets out of hand, if you're dealing with, neighbors or schools or DCF or whatever, with those kinds of accusations, it's pretty hard to do that.
It really hurt me because I did not know about it for a while, and I guess some of my family members did, and then just they did not approach me and talk to me about this. I didn't know how to deal with that,
Yeah, so you're the one who's choosing how you respond to this situation. And so think about maybe different ways of looking at where this information is coming from. They may not have seen the truth, but perhaps they're being protective on behalf of your child. And although misguided, here they are trying to stick up for the child, confronting or this sort of thing. But I think that the work is yours. right? In understanding that, you know, if it's not true, right? If it's not true, you have no reason to defend yourself. Like I
Yeah,
tell,
nothing like this ever came up before,
Yeah.
but it was very deep accusation against me and
shocking.
shocking. And that just that my family did not approach me. I understand that stuff happened, but they did not
So
approach me.
what you're really reacting to is that they were in on it without you.
Exactly. That's my big, yeah.
And what does that make you feel like?
Piece of shit.
Betrayed in a way.
A what?
Betrayed. Like that.
Betrayed, yeah. Right? And so where does that take you back? Where is this? Why is betrayal this issue in your life? Did you have betrayal when you were growing up?
Yes, I had not a good relationship with my father, so
Yeah.
so
So it's an interesting way to turn this around into how what these people are actually doing is stirring up your unhealed, wounded past that's begging for more healing.
yeah.
It's an opportunity. It sounds like an awful lesson. But what do you suppose the other side of this looks like?
I don't know.
What do you think resolution would feel like?
Just the truth.
Yeah. What do you suppose that would feel like if it got resolved to your satisfaction?
We all on a clear path. I mean, we all opened with each other and talked about this.
Yeah. And what would your heart be like if that were happening?
Relaxed. Yeah, I would be back to normal.
Yeah. And then what would you feel like when you're around those people, when you're seeing them, when you're walking, talking to them?
Not sure. We haven't talked since then. It was
No,
just
let's say that you had resolved, you have your heart open, you're feeling relaxed, right?
I would be myself.
Yeah, you would be yourself like you were before you knew.
And what's one specific way, Dimitri? One person in your life, if you could look at being open-hearted, being truly to yourself, what's one person that you know in your life, if I could act this way, it would be different? Very specific in your life kind of situation.
Can you please say that again?
Well, so what's one specific way, if you were to choose to have a little bit more open heart and you were choose to step into this ideal, what's one person, place, or thing specifically in your life that would improve? Do you have a daughter, a son? Do you have kids?
Definitely my son. Yeah.
Definitely your son. And if your son saw you go with an open heart, what specifically would that teach him?
That you know, you gotta do the right thing. You have to be honest and aligned, you know.
And stand in your truth. When you stand in
breaking
your
the cycle, you're breaking the cycle of trauma that happens. You know, we're all amateur parents, and so our parents were amateur parents, and all the way back, and that's breaking the trauma, that chain, that cycle of trauma that we cause unconsciously.
Okay.
Powerful work, brother.
Great question.
Thank you, Dimitri. Corey, are you ready?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So I would like to ask a little bit about your experience as the wounded healer. I think there are a couple of them in the group that might be able to help me out. I have been working with the medicine for about 3 years, and my ACEs score is pretty high. And so I went into nursing, surprise, and migrated into pediatric cancer and then pediatric emergency trauma in a very busy, urban, complicated environment. And I was really good at it, really good. I could handle anything. And I now realize I was really good at numbing. And so I appeared to have it totally under control. But so at some point I had my own children and I became a nurse practitioner, and I have a mindless job writing prescriptions dictated by a medical system that I think is really dysfunctional. And as I've gone through this process of healing, and I've come pretty far, but have a ways to go, I have really felt a need to get out of this healthcare system and do something that feels meaningful again, and maybe get back to the bedside and do pediatric ER. I realize how much purpose I felt in that. Or addiction medicine has called me, but one of the things that comes up for me is how much I was using my helping others to really help myself, and trying to find that boundary where I don't know exactly, maybe you know what it is that I'm trying to say, but how can I continue on my own healing? I mean, I'm the empath everyone talks about. I absorb whatever everyone else is feeling. I don't know what that really means, but how do you work around that issue? And how can I approach a more purposeful career again without impeding my progress on what I've got to work on?
That's a great question, and one I can definitely relate to. I identify with the wounded healer archetype as well. Before I got into kind of a healthy balance in my life, I'm an intensive care unit physician. That's what my background is, and so did a lot of work in that area, long hours, give, in terms of giving of myself, numbing out with work, with other accomplishments and things like that. And I even got to a point where, the thing that finally brought me down in my struggles with addiction is I found amphetamines. And I'm like, man, I don't have to say no to anybody with these. I can do everything for everybody and I'll be enough. And of course, it was never enough. And things came crashing down pretty horribly, although that did get me onto this path, which I'm on now. Finding balance is tricky. It really is, because and in fact, one of my retreat weekends, this came up. This was a theme about overgiving, giving to the point that my heart is empty and I have nothing left to give. And I really have to be deliberate about how I take care of myself, because my default is to give, is to listen, is to try and heal. And I have to maintain that in myself. I have to say no in healthy ways, to set limits, to step aside. I finally walked away from intensive care. I was at a point where I was in a horrible job. It was too many hours. My boss was a terror. And I remember getting on my knees one night in the call room and just telling my higher power, like, look, I'll do anything. I need to get out of this. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it looks like. Just show me where I should jump. And it wasn't long after that I came across this article about doing ketamine infusion therapy to help with treatment-resistant depression. And it was like there was a light glowing around the article. And I'm like, oh, this is the path forward. And even then I was afraid to jump. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can do it, start my own clinic. And my higher power found a way to get me out of that job that involved them giving me my 90-day notice. So sometimes the universe will do for you what you can't do for yourself. But being open, asking the right questions, watching for synchronicities in your life, and really importantly, being able to practice and do saying no, that no is okay, no is healthy. If I don't take care of myself, I will not be able to help others. And it doesn't matter how skilled I am as a wounded healer, it just won't matter. So I hope that begins to answer your question. It's a really good one, and certainly one that I continue to struggle to find the right balances, but I'm getting a little bit better at not getting so off center now.
Thank you.
All right.
Dr. Eric, I'm sorry, Dr. Scott.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I was going to say, we're going to wrap it up here. You got another question?
Well, it's more or less not really a question. It's just that John wants to know if you work with individuals from SoulQuest. And if you do, how does someone get in contact with you? So I told him that you could put your information in chat and then he can contact you that way.
Right. That would be a good way to reach out. My day-to-day practice, I primarily work with ketamine infusion therapy as one way of helping people with treatment-resistant depression. The group therapies that I do are primarily in the setting of an addiction treatment facility where I work with people who are fresh in recovery and work with their traumas. I don't have a separate trauma practice right now. It's something I've considered, but it's not something I have room right now in my life. But I'd be willing to talk with whoever wants to reach out. If I don't have the resources to be able to help you, I may know who I can plug you into. And I also, I mean, I certainly would have to plug for SoulQuest itself. There are a number of gifted therapists present at SoulQuest who do individual work that have tremendous trauma backgrounds and would be able to help you as well.
Right. I was thinking the same thing, and also maybe some of the integration work. So
Absolutely.
John or anyone can contact SoulQuest.
Yeah. All right.
Great questions.
Go ahead, love.
I have a quick question,
Thank
Doctor.
everybody. Great questions.
It's just a simple question. Dr. Milbrandt, thank you so much for your presentation. And it really resonated with me because, I've been dealing with trauma from an infant. So I really don't have the tool to verbalize it. And one of the things I recognize is that the trauma brought on fear, fear that I couldn't verbalize or anything. And I feel that it has attracted negative energy to me and all of that. So I'm dealing with that. One of the coping mechanisms that I use is just to, I don't know where it comes from, is to disassociate from anything that is kind of bringing up any notion of what I've been through. And I felt that in your presentation, even though I really wanted to hear it in its entirety, I don't know if you noticed, I turned my back and I really didn't hear a lot of it, which is something that I do as one of my coping skills. But one of the things that I'm interested in that you said that there is someone that offers a 5-day workshop.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm coming to SoulQuest this weekend, but I feel that, and one of the things that Mother Aya has shown me is that I need to also, in addition to the integration, that I need to really get more one-on-one or more something else. And I think what you said resonated with me. So I just wanted you to repeat that. And if possible, if there's some way I could get it, see your presentation again in its entirety, because I think I lost out on more than half of it because
It's in the recording. So the recording's going to be on Facebook and it'll also be in the emails that come out.
Okay. All right. So I can get that information. And thank you so very much. It was really what I needed at this time. And I'll see you guys this weekend.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. Someone posted the link for Spirit to Spirit healing. Those were the trauma intensives I was talking about. There are 5-day workshops. You work with some incredibly trauma gifted people, typically with about between 8 and 10 people in a group. So you've got that group therapy element, and they're long days. I mean, they're 8-hour days, but you get a tremendous amount of work done in a short period of time because of that. I know there are lots of other places that offer similar things, but I'm a big believer in groups for trauma, and I really like doing a lot of work in a short period of time, as opposed to an hour once a week where it takes some time to get momentum, and it's just, you just can't get much done in an hour. A retreat weekend at SoulQuest is obviously huge too, and I know there are different add-ons you can do during your weekend, doing one-on-one integration work actually on the weekend, if you can set that up too. So lots of opportunities, both at SoulQuest and elsewhere. But I'm glad that you're wanting to do that work. The trauma that we experienced in the pre-verbal period is just as important, and there are ways to work through that, definitely.
Yeah, Sharon, just think about that. You're talking about trauma that was in the early stages before you had cognitive development. Those you didn't even have language skills, and so those experiences are felt deep and stored deep within the body. And so I would recommend the book that Eric also talked about. Dr. Eric talked about the body remembers.
The body keeps the score.
Keeps the score.
Yeah, and there's another one that's by the Spirit to Spirit founder called Trauma Heart, which is also a good one. It leans a little more towards addiction and how trauma leads to recurrent relapse there, but it also gives you a flavor for how the new understanding is about trauma and how it affects how we relate to the world and how we think of ourselves.
And when you do the ayahuasca work with the medicine, when that trauma energy starts to reveal itself, it can come up as a very dark, difficult, scary, frightening, painful, experience. And that's the medicine showing, bringing it up, as Dr. Eric talks about, the default mode network goes off, and then you have access to repressed memories. You got access to resources, information in your brain that you wouldn't have normally because it's been protecting you. And so, when you get to process that, it's getting through it. It's allowing it to show itself, be in it, and let it process. Usually you need somebody to recalibrate you afterwards through their own energy, because you're there by yourself, usually in that trauma. And you need somebody's, central nervous system that's calm and loving and protective to embrace you and hold you and nurture you, because you probably didn't have that. And so that can help you, help your body to recalibrate after reliving the trauma or allowing the release of a trauma. So that might be something, if you find some of that work happening at SoulQuest, to ask a facilitator to help you if you need a hug, to hold you. And they'll do that if you ask them. If you've had omission as a part of your experience, that may be exactly what you need for you to reset after you pull that stuff up. So anything to add to that, Dr. Eric?
I think you said it really well. There's a lot of different places that you can reach out for healing, and SoulQuest has a wealth of them. The integration work, I mentioned that earlier. It's just so important. Difficult things will come up, and trying to tackle them on our own, you might be able to make it through okay, but boy, it's the one arm tied behind your back and the other one the leg without a shoe on, and it just really, again, getting back to asking for and accepting help. There are people who have walked this path before and can show me the way if I'm willing to ask.
We use the video at SoulQuest, from Dr. Gabor Mate, and he has a lot of great insights about trauma and how trauma is the separation from our true self, and that there's a lot of resources that Dr. Gabor Mate brings to the table. And his last name is spelled M-A-T-E, Mate. So it's Gabor, and great work that he's done in trauma. And so I'd highly recommend drilling down on some of his stuff too. Because
I was just going to quickly say, a good place to start with that is In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts.
Yeah.
Excellent book, and it has just really a lot of amazing themes in it. Good guy.
Yeah, and I've seen several of Dr. Mate's talks, and there is a common foundation to, a lot of what he talks about, and that is that the original self, the true self, was connected, connected to the universe, was connected to love, was connected to the being, and so it was your body that was raped, not your spirit. It was your ego that's the interpreter of these events, not your spirit. Your spirit is whole, perfect, complete, absolutely maintained. Nothing ever could change that. And so that's why anything that you can do in fortifying your spiritual identity is the power and the strength that you take with you to face these very challenging decisions about how you choose to respond, what happened to you, how you choose to respond to the story that's been haunting you. With our clearer spiritual identity, we can enter into the darkness with the light. So, Dr. Eric, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today and all that you bring to our organization. Yeah, I see Ron doing happy hands. We are, we're so blessed and so lucky to have you, here with us and being a part of our community and bringing your wisdom, your knowledge, and your experience with you. So often, I am looking forward to the next time we do one of these two. And,
absolutely.
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
And it's a pleasure getting to know you on all different levels, so professionally and personally, and hearing about your story. And I want to thank you for revealing that and being vulnerable and personal and sharing, because you know, it's like I talk about, who wants to learn from a fluffy white angel, right? Give me somebody who has crawled out of the depths of, you know, suicide, despair, who's found the way back to the light, you know, after the fall. And it's through that kind of experience. And that's the purpose, I think, of that type of seasoning that gives us our purpose and our meaning and our mission in our lives. Because look what you can do with all that suffering, that you've turned that tragedy into treasure. And now it's your x-ray vision into other people's pain. And
So well put.
it makes you into a great healer. And so thank you for what you bring to our community.